morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elise Hauserman. I'm the marketing director at Points North, and today's webinar is all focused around certified payroll, mitigating risks, and ensuring stability. We already went through all the housekeeping items, which is great. Thanks so much for that, Dan. With that out of the way, we'll kind of start talking about our presenters. So we have two fantastic presenters today, Scott and Nick, who will be sharing their experience on how certified payroll and the changing economy are showing up with their clients and across industries today. So to start, I figure we'll have Scott and Nick briefly introduce themselves, and then we can kind of kick it off. So why don't we start with Scott? Scott, why don't you give us a brief introduction?
Yes, I'm Scott Laudermilk with Greenshades Software. I've been in the payroll HR world for over 15 years. Just to give you a little bit of background on Greenshades, Greenshades Software is a leading provider of innovative payroll and HR solutions designed to automate and simplify your business process. With a deep commitment to helping organizations manage their workforce efficiently, we offer a comprehensive suite to help automate your payroll, HR needs, such as employee self-service, onboarding and benefit admin, and tax compliance.
Thanks, Scott. We're really lucky to have you today. And then we'll toss it over to Nick. Nick, do you want to give us your quick elevator pitch?
Certainly. Hello, everyone. Nick Foucault. I'm with Points North. Points North being the name of our company. We're a compliance-focused software company with multiple solutions. I'm in a general management role for our solution called Certified Payroll Reporting, which helps with the prevailing wage use case, Davis-Bacon, certified payroll reports. We've been fortunate to work with Greenshades for a long time. I myself have been with Points North about 12 years. So certainly looking forward to presenting to everybody today.
Thanks, Nick. So if we hop over to the next slide, we'll just briefly go over today's agenda, and then I'm going to kind of give you guys an opportunity to talk through some of the slides while we get some questions from the audience. So today the goal really is to talk about the intersection specifically around the economic challenges and changes that we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years and how certified payroll and compliance kind of play into that, how you as companies can be leveraging certified payroll and prevailing wage to really help support your companies during kind of the economic landscape change. Scott and Nick, we're going to talk a little bit about best practices for efficient certified payroll management and risk mitigation. And we'll talk a little bit about how to leverage the opportunities that we're seeing in this field for stability and how to leverage technology to do that. So it's going to be a jam-packed 60 minutes, but we're going to keep it pretty fun, I think. So when we're talking about changing economy in the payroll compliance space, we know that not only does it impact the company itself, but also the employees. So Scott, if you want to talk maybe just a little bit about these percentages, specifically what Greenshades is seeing around how the changes are impacting, payroll operations reporting and the impact of the workforce itself.
Well, I think what we're seeing out there is, obviously there's a lot more regulation out there, and we're seeing within payroll things like the ACA and a lot of the different state organizations that are adding different compliance levels that you really have to track and make sure you do correctly. And what we've seen out there in the business world is really there's a lot of issues going on with the economy and say you're in construction and the building of new businesses and things like that. Whereas if you're looking toward the federal government and things like that, those are a lot of really stable things that we're seeing people lean toward, and that obviously leads us toward certified payroll. I think what people need is a solution that tracks everything they need. So whether it's taxes, ACA, down into certified payroll, and allows them to report that and do it correctly to make sure they're doing things the right way so they don't get penalized or anything like that.
That makes sense. Nick, do you have anything to add specific to this slide in terms of how the economy and the changing landscape kind of impacts the workers that work within companies that are dealing with payroll?
Yeah, I would say what's interesting to me is that going back to the 1930s, and talking specifically about the Davis-Bacon Act, right? The law that put in place originally the requirement to pay prevailing wages when working on government-funded jobs. You take that as one small subset of an overall compliance landscape. It's only ever gone one direction over the course of now coming up on 100 years, and that's up. There's, to Scott's point, more and more compliance requirements that are becoming commonplace, not just for industries that maybe are a little more niche, but just much more broadly. The recent laws like the Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act, these are creating additional compliance requirements. Of course, the Affordable Care Act from the early 2010s. The compliance landscape is just growing. And the best practice is definitely to have a solution or integrated solutions that can help employers to manage that, especially in relation to their workforce. Take an example, construction-focused companies with workforce employees that are out on job sites, actually having a methodology to track the time that they're spending across those different sites. It's really not optional. It's going to be a requirement to ensure that the different rates that are necessary to be adhered to based on the different job functions or work classifications that are transpiring on that site. These are the types of things that we'll be talking about further as we go. But like I said, definitely an increasing compliance landscape out there in the world right now.
Thanks, Nick. Well, I think that takes us kind of to our next slide, which is really talking about not just the employees and the impact on the employees, but really talking about how the changing landscape really is impacting companies as a whole, which both of you kind of briefly mentioned, but we can dig in a little bit more, specifically around kind of the benefits of accurate payroll management, which Scott, I know you're going to chat about briefly, and then kind of like you were talking about, Nick, the benefits of prevailing wage work. So let's start at the base of everything, which is kind of that payroll side of things. So what are the benefits of leveraging kind of, or having accurate payroll management, I should say, before we get into the risks? What's the kind of baseline needs for an organization from a payroll side, Scott?
I think for a baseline, a company needs a solution, one that's going to allow them to pay their employees, whether that's via check or more likely direct deposit, calculate the taxes, do that correctly. So that's the bare minimum, do your taxes and pay your employees. But also, and as we see things changing, you go into more providing benefits to the actual employee, where it's as simple as getting to see their check stub quickly on their phone, looking at their benefits on their phone, interacting within the company via these solutions that are out there. I mean, that's really the base level of it. And then that allows you, when you have a system that gives you that flexibility and tracks everything accurately, it allows you to expand. It allows you to go into states with locals or states with different rules. Each state is different. So if you're doing it very manually and don't have the capabilities to expand on the payroll side, it's going to hurt your expansion of your company. So I think it really helps the company and it really helps the employees by making their lives easier.
Absolutely. And I think that we're definitely going to be getting into the risks kind of that you alluded to, which I think is a great segue. Nick, let's talk a little bit briefly about prevailing wage. What are the benefits specifically around leveraging prevailing wage works or public works projects as an organization?
Yeah, there's many benefits. Prevailing wage work can be a wonderful thing if you have the tools to manage the compliance, right? We'll talk about that. But if you take on this prevailing wage work, there's usually a great degree of stability in that. There's no shortage of this work. It continues to ramp up, especially depending on the regulatory environment that's going on at any given time. Even if that environment is going towards the lesser side of the regulation, this work is still there. So companies that choose actively to pursue it, take it on, do it competently, there'll always be more of it. And doing the reporting in a compliant, timely fashion, we've seen many clients who have experienced an uptick in winning bids after they've built that reputation, so to speak, for managing the compliance aspects around this. And then employee retention, generally the prevailing wages and the benefits that are afforded to employees, to labor, by virtue of taking on these contracts, that makes for happy employees. The compensation is generally favorable in terms of what the employee experiences. So companies that are actively doing this work are experiencing a more satisfied and a more highly retained workforce.
That's great. So before we dig into the risks and the challenges that can come with, certified payroll and prevailing wage work, let's give the audience a little bit of a background. On the next slide, I know we have a lot of content, which we'll obviously be sending the deck out after. But I'd love, Nick, if you could just you gave a teaser, but a little overview of, what exactly is certified payroll?
Absolutely. So back to the 1930s, like I mentioned, there's a federal law called the Davis-Bacon Act. You'll hear that Davis-Bacon term used a lot in this space. That's the law that created the requirement to pay what are now known as prevailing wages when you're working on a government-funded construction job, construction being a very broad term. And so basically you take on a project from the government, a job from the government, you'll need to adhere to the appropriate rates that the government stipulates for the workers on that job. It's really not up to the employer any longer. It's now a requirement to pay the rates that are necessary, that are mandated through that contract. Not only does that have to transpire from a true payroll standpoint, but after the conclusion of each pay period, for each of those individual government jobs, a very specific report will have to be produced that tells the story of the employees that were working on that job during that pay period, the hours they were working, the type of work they performed, the rate that they were paid, some of their overall paycheck detail. When a report like that is signed and then submitted to the agency responsible for that project, that's when the employer is quote unquote certifying that they were compliant with all the aspects of what they had to adhere to. That's really where the term certified payroll and certified payroll reporting comes from. It's really two-sided. One is ensuring the appropriate rates are understood and paid to the employee, and then the reporting that has to take place after that pay period is concluded, where the employer is certifying, is swearing their name to the fact that they did in fact pay the appropriate rates that the employee was entitled to by virtue of the fact that they were working hours specifically on that job.
Perfect. That was a great overview. And if anybody, of course, has questions specifically around this, feel free to toss it in the chat and I'll ask Nick and he'd be happy to answer any additional questions on the basics of what is certified payroll. So now that we have the base kind of laid out, let's talk on the next slide specifically around the risks and the challenges. We know that one, change can be scary for any company considering taking on prevailing wage work, and sometimes the fear is justified because there can be risks. There can be risks, and that's on both on the payroll side and on the payroll compliance side. So why don't we start with Scott? Can you talk a little bit about kind of payroll compliance in terms of like wages, taxes, benefit allocations, kind of what the risks are in not doing those things accurately, correctly, or on time?
Yeah, I mean, what it comes down to, if you don't pay your taxes on time, you're going to get highly penalized. You don't pay your people on time, you could lose them. And obviously benefits, same goes with that. Really, when you have a solution like a Greenshades that will track all the pay, more importantly, all the taxes, so you don't have to worry about when taxes are changing or rates change. It'll track all that for you and make sure you have access to all your benefits. All those things get paid on time. So like on the slide, talks about contractors and subcontractors. If you've got this set into the system and you're adding everything correctly, the system is going to track it. It's going to pay them on time. It's going to pay them by direct deposit. And it's a nice, easy solution for you. Again, delays can be really catastrophic to a business. I mean, I've run into stories of people getting tens of thousands of dollars in tax fines because they weren't, not on purpose, but just weren't tracking things properly, weren't paying it on time. And if you don't pay it on time, there starts to become penalties. So that's really the risk in not having a solution that tracks it all for you and really does it all for you. I mean, I always say with the correct solution, the payroll and the taxes should be more of a review process for you to make sure everything's in line. Obviously, we still want humans to take a look at things, but the solution should track it all, calculate it all, and you should be hitting a button to pay your taxes. So that gives you that peace of mind by having something kind of watch over things for you, because the risk and the penalties can be severe.
All very good points. And I mean, I think that also plays into kind of that fear around prevailing wage work in general. So Nick, why don't you talk a little bit about, what are the typical, well, both risks obviously to a company, but also, you talk to a lot of clients or prospects around kind of their fear of taking on prevailing wage work and what that kind of looks like.
Yeah, this is where I think it really gets interesting. Having done this over a dozen years now, I've seen just a lot of different things in this space, and I've got some interesting anecdotes that I can share here. But just like you said, generally people shy away from this work. They are not actively pursuing this work, and there are, like we talked about, some real benefits if you can get into this space and do these types of projects. The biggest reason that people shy away from the work is that they're just confused or trepidatious about the compliance requirements, and honestly, for good reason. An example would be, I had a client once where they started taking on prevailing wage work in multiple states. This was not a small company. This was a large company. They had a compliance department and that sort of thing, but it was just brand new for them to be dealing specifically with prevailing wage. And so they started taking on projects in multiple states. Those projects got underway. A couple pay periods transpired. The client understood that they needed to understand and pay the appropriate rates for the hours that the employees would be working. They had no understanding whatsoever that they'd have to do the post-payroll reporting for each of those jobs for every single pay period. So all of a sudden, a couple weeks go by, they find themselves multiple reports behind right off the gate. And it was compounded even further with the realization that there were multiple report formats that needed to be adhered to. Back to that concept of the Davis-Bacon Act, this would be a whole lot simpler if maybe there was just one universal report format that would meet the need around this. There's upwards of 75 different formats of these reports all across the country. The federal format, of course, commonly known as the WH-347, put out by the Wage and Hour Division of the U.S. Department of Labor. But like I say, upwards of 75 others at a state and municipal level that are very important to comply with. If someone fills out that federal format, they submit it to, say, the California Department of Industrial Relations, it'll be rejected as being the incorrect format, even though generally a lot of the data elements are similar. So just having a lot of anxiety or confusion steers people away from this type of work, and it really doesn't have to if, to Scott and Elisa's points, you have systems that are in place to manage this. Another interesting thing is people who do feel open to take on this type of work, they're often concerned there's going to be delays in payment. And that's, again, is a valid concern if this reporting's not done on time and in the correct formats. I had another client, another anecdote, where they, for a variety of reasons, were a year and a half behind on doing their prevailing wage reporting. And like I said, there were multiple reasons for that. But they found themselves with upwards of $1 million held up to them in payments. And that, the way that they found that out, it came as a bit of a surprise. It wasn't something they were anticipating. So if this reporting is not done on time and every single pay period is on time for this type of thing, a little bit different than most compliance reporting, it happens so frequently. It's not done on time and in the right format, those payments are going to be held up. And then getting into the extreme side of things, this is at its root a labor compliance requirement. The government takes that very seriously. It's one of the things they care about most because it directly affects employees that are performing work on job sites. If a contractor was going to be so bold as to falsify some of this type of reporting, or perhaps to require the employees to give them back a portion of the prevailing wage because maybe it's higher than the rate that they typically pay their employees, if they were to do that and then produce reports that indicated the employee received the full value of the rate they were entitled to, there would be very serious legal penalties. There was an an instance of this a while back, a company called Honda Electric that did exactly what I described, created certified reports that were not accurate, were not truthful, signed their name to those. They actually did end up getting a prison sentence for that type of thing. And of course, that leads to disbarment, inability to bid on prevailing wage work or any form of government work, lawsuits, fines. Again, that's the serious end of the spectrum. But these types of things can cause people to shy away from this space in general, and it really doesn't have to if you take the time to understand how can payroll and an integrated system focused on this use case help to really automate the vast majority of what has to happen.
Great, thanks, Nick. Now that we've thoroughly covered the fears and the risks of kind of certified payroll compliance and lack of leveraging full company payroll compliance, let's talk about how to mitigate those risks. So we gave you guys all of the fear, but it doesn't have to be fearful. And there are some pretty easy ways to be able to kind of mitigate that risk and then make your company, your leadership team, your employees more comfortable with taking on prevailing wage work. And we've broken it down into 3 pretty simple steps. Let's start with you, Nick, this time. Do you want to kind of briefly cover kind of how we can mitigate the risks of certified payroll compliance? And then Scott, we'll toss it over to you, and you can kind of talk also about the overall mitigation of risk from a payroll in totality standpoint.
Yeah, certainly. And as with most things that seem overwhelming, when you boil it down, it is a lot simpler than usually meets the eye. And it all does start with the education aspect, right? You take on a government job, just familiarizing yourself with the requirements that are stipulated with that job is always step 1, right? The first and foremost requirement, in my opinion, is what are the rates that need to be adhered to for this project? And it's usually one level deeper than that. It's for the project and then what's generally known as the work classification. So inside of the prevailing wage contract, it will usually say something along the lines of the fact that for this project, Project ABC, all carpenters must receive an hourly rate of, say, $50. All electricians must receive an hourly rate of $60. That's generally how the prevailing wage rates are stipulated, is at a project and work classification level. The second step, tracking this detail, the most important data element is hours worked, of course, by employee, but then by day, job, and work classification. Back to what I was just describing, that's going to come in step 3, the nature of this type of reporting. It's very important to know that John Smith worked 5 hours on Monday, August 1st on Project ABC, and he was a carpenter. Then perhaps he worked 3 hours also on Monday, August 1st, maybe again on Project ABC, but this time he was an electrician. That's what the reporting is going to require to show, is project-based reporting, and then which employees were on the project, what type of work did they do, what they were paid. That's what step 3 is all about, is producing the reports at that level so that when they're sent off to the agency responsible for the job, they can review those reports, they can understand that you're telling them John Smith worked certain hours, performed a certain type of work, was paid X as an hourly rate. And when they take that, they compare that against the prevailing wage requirements for that job. The idea is to make sure that you're certifying, that you're stipulating that you paid everybody at or above that necessary rate.
Perfect. And that obviously rolls in then to like overall payroll compliance, because if your payroll is not correct up front, then the data that you're putting into these reports is not correct on the back end. So Scott, can you talk a little bit about how to mitigate, the risks of, I think that, the biggest risk that we kind of mentioned in the previous slide is really the risks in the manual work of managing payroll. We know that there are a lot of people that are still leveraging spreadsheets and paper time cards and things of that nature. And we know that that's an inherent risk because people make mistakes. So how do we mitigate those risks from a payroll compliance standpoint?
Yeah, and like you said, we're all human, we make mistakes. How you mitigate that is put a solution in place that will track all that for you. So like Nick said, you put in, Bill Smith worked 3 hours as an electrician and then 3 hours as a carpenter. If you have a system that can track that, again, it goes back to what I said about the review process. So you need something that can help you. So you can put in place something that tracks the time. When they change positions, they can change what they're doing. And the system can track all that and then feed it up for the certified payroll. So like you guys said, if you mess up, it doesn't matter how great the certified payroll solution is. If you mess up the payroll part, it's going to be wrong. So putting in place something that tracks the time, can track the different jobs, can track, the different dates, and if he worked different jobs and different dates, and that's all a lot, but that's why you need a system so you can track all these things. And in this day and age, you can, honestly, you can use your phone to clock in. Okay, I'm not an electrician now. I'm now a carpenter, and you can clock in, and change your job title, and clock back in as a different job title, and that can be tracked. Or, the system also gives you the ability to review all this to make sure that's correct. Employees will forget to check or to change what they're doing. So the system allows you to check it, make sure it tracks it all for you, and really, again, trying to simplify this, because if you're trying to do this all by hand and by memory, that can get really daunting. And again, like Nick said, there's some serious repercussions if you mess this up. You may not be doing it on purpose, but if you're not putting the things in place, you're still liable for it. So I think that's really where the proper solution helps you mitigate that risk.
All very, very good points. I'm going to toss in a question really quick, because we did get a question from the audience that came in a couple minutes ago, and I think that this question also, a version of it, was asked when somebody registered, specifically around any new certified payroll requirements. Is there anything new that's changed specific to certified payroll? This question, I suppose, would be mostly for Nick. And then, are there any trends that we should be aware of around certified payroll? So it's a two-parter.
Yeah, the way I always like to describe that is the more that things change, the more they really stay the same. There are not big, sweeping, dramatic changes generally to this use case. There are laws that come into effect, again, kind of depending on the regulatory environment at a state or federal level, that create more volume of this type of work. Generally, the work and the rate management aspects and the reporting aspects are pretty consistent. The thing that does continue to get more complex, more difficult, is the reporting. Over the course of the last 10 years or so, electronic filing has become a lot more prevalent. This has always been something where PDF reports that oftentimes would need to be printed out, signed by hand with a blue ink pen, right, mailed off in the U.S. mail. That was really the nature of this for a long time. It still is to some degree. But certain agencies have started really building their own portals, their own online systems to collect this type of data. The California Department of Industrial Relations really led the way on that, and they have their own proprietary portal that contractors are required to submit data to in order to be in compliance with these projects. There's more of that continues to come into the public sphere. Illinois followed suit recently. Washington State has its own portal. There's also private third-party companies that agencies will often contract now to receive the data into their portals. So the reporting does continue to increase in complexity and in format.
Absolutely. I like the aspect of, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I will say, to kind of piggyback off of what Nick mentioned, is that although things haven't really changed, the landscape in which certified payroll and government works projects has continued to expand. I know Nick mentioned the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Act. There's the Green Act, the Walsh-Healy public contract. So there's a lot more government, publicly funded government work to be had, which I think makes this aspect of prevailing wage more enticing to a lot of companies that otherwise haven't really been engaged or aware of certified payroll in the past. They haven't needed to. There hasn't been work in their applicable industries, and that's continuing to expand. Okay, we have another question that just came in while Nick was talking, and Scott, this is, I think, for you. So somebody had asked, when people manually run payroll, it can take a long time. How much time have you seen saved with the use of a software solution?
Oh, wow. I mean, depending on how big the company is, honestly, it can be days. So if you're manually running payroll, say let's use construction since we're talking, some of the certified payroll as an example, and you have multiple states, multiple jobs, and you're tracking all this. I've had a company that has 4 people in their payroll department. They're basically tracking time and location. They put in a payroll software. They can use those people for other jobs within the accounting side of life, and really bring this down to one person. Again, it should be a review process. So it can be days on a smaller companies. It's hours. So at a smaller company, say 25 employees, doing payroll manually would take half to 3/4 of a day. Doing it with a solution, I don't want to simplify it too much, but it really can be. It can be an hour, if that. So because again, you're pulling up all your reports, you're reviewing the time. Okay, that all matches up, and again, don't want to simplify too much, but you're pressing a button to pay your taxes, and you're uploading a file to do your direct deposit. So that is really some of the things that it's unmeasurable, to be honest with you. It can be hours to days as far as what it saves you in time.
I know there's a lot I could get done with a few extra hours or days in my work day or week.
I try not to simplify it too much, but it makes a major difference in your accounting and your payroll people's lives, and allows you to allocate those people's time to other things that, a big company, payroll is not the only thing the accounting department does. So it also, back to what we were talking about earlier, it's security. It's right. You don't have to worry that you put it on the wrong form, or that you didn't check the wrong job site or anything like that. It's all tracked electronically for you.
Great. And I mean, obviously this then rolls into that aspect of compliance from a prevailing wage standpoint, Nick. So when you're thinking about people that are manually filling out, WH-347s or typing something into the California DIR, what kind of, time savings are you seeing on the prevailing wage side by leveraging technology?
That's another one where I've got a lot of good anecdotes from over the years. And just even first off, if you look at the federal report format, the WH-347, you'll see in the fine print right on there that the Department of Labor estimates it will take someone 55 minutes to complete that report. So even by the government's own estimate, it's going to take you an hour for each and every individual report that you have to produce every single pay period, which is typically weekly, for every single job. So you can see the exponential time that that's going to take once you have 2 jobs, 5 jobs, 10 jobs, hundreds of jobs, like many of our clients have. I have seen people who have had departments of people, clients, I should say, had departments of people doing this. And to Scott's point, there's other things to do that are a lot more impactful than filling out this type of reporting manually, keying data into these online portals, into these online systems. I've seen people who have done that for 40 hours a week, 40 hours a week straight, just keying in that data. I mean, yeah, Scott is not exaggerating it when he says it's kind of hard to quantify how much time and energy is saved around this. Plus, when you put on top of it the risk mitigation of just literally having the technology doing the work, moving the data. Take the certified reporting example, a system like Greenshades Payroll, moving the data to the Points North solution, which is moving the data to the government portal. A lot less risk around that than trying to read a payroll register and go key in that data and potentially make a mistake and type it in the wrong dollar amount, because you're doing this so often with such frequency that without automation, a lot riskier.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen companies not take on government contracts because they didn't have enough people to handle all this. This also allows smaller as far as number of people, like in an accounting department, to take on these golden opportunities, to be honest, because there's a lot of it going on right now. Because if you take these two systems, they take care of the hard part, the hard and scary part of it for you.
That's very true. And Scott, that is a good segue into our next slide, which is really talking about leveraging opportunities for stability, leveraging prevailing wage through the use of technology. So not trying to cut you off. So if you have more to share, please do.
No, I'm good.
I think that this is a great opportunity for us to kind of segue right into the benefits of leveraging technology to be able to confidently take on government contracts and prevailing wage work and mitigate the risk, kind of like Scott was talking about. So Scott, why don't we have you kind of briefly review, the payroll software solutions with Greenshades that assist on the payroll compliance side. And then Nick, you can do a quick elevator pitch around exactly what certified payroll reporting does.
All right, perfect. So Greenshades software, we can kind of do it all for you until you get to the certified payroll reporting part. So you can do it electronically, bring in your new employees, you can follow your payroll, you can do your taxes, you can pay your peoples your people. You can track their time between the different locations, so you can report all this information correctly up to Points North. Greenshades even does it a little different. It's an in-house solution, so you don't lose control of your payroll or your tax money or anything like that you do sometimes in some other solutions. And then I'm a big proponent, I think Greenshades is too, of let's do what we do well and then partner with somebody that does like certified payroll. It's its own animal. That's why we partner with Points North, because they know what they're doing, and you use these two systems. Again, from the time you hire a new employee until you pay them, until you're ready to submit your certified payroll reports, you can send it all through us. It loads into Points North, and again, I tend to simplify things a little bit, but away you go, and you can track all this stuff and really put that fear and worry behind you. So all the paper and all the calculations, all that stuff can go away. And you still control your business, you still control your tax money, and you're doing it correctly, and it allows you to do certified payroll, allows you to move into states like Pennsylvania, Ohio with locals. You're not limited by your knowledge. You have a partner in Greenshade software that allows you to do that. And then that's why we partner with Points North to kind of take this all the way to the end and do it all correctly.
That's great.
It's well said, Scott. And the thing that's interesting, again, I do find this space quite interesting, and having worked in it for so long, it's very common for people to, say they do take the plunge, they get into this space, they take on government-funded jobs, they look at that first report that they have to produce, and they say, this can't be right. This report is asking for the employee demographic detail, it's asking for paycheck detail, and then it's asking for hours detail, but it seems to be asking only for the hours worked specifically on this job. And a lot of people just have a hard time reconciling that, because it's not necessarily intuitive that the employee might literally have just worked 1 hour on that job, but then you're being asked to report on the entirety of their compensation for the entire pay period. It just seems like a disconnect, right? So that is the reality of these types of reports. That's the nature of the data they want to see, job by job. Difficult to get that data assembled and then parsed out the right way onto those individual reports manually, especially if they're in different formats. And so through the integration that we have with Greenshades, the appropriate data is making its way to our system. Again, kind of boiling it down, employee detail, hours detail, paycheck detail. That data is making its way to our system. Our system has the logic, so to speak, to get it onto the appropriate report formats and show in the appropriate areas of each 75 plus of those formats the data that each one wants to see. Some of them want to see the total compensation for the entire pay period and, for example, just what was earned specifically on that job, the rates times the hours worked on that job, so to speak. The system can do all that. So it does take it from hours down to minutes when you're working with a solution that really the key for us is integrated with payroll. That's where the bulk of this data is going to live. To make its way then as quickly as possible onto these very different formats that are looking for some unintuitive data combinations, that's really where the system starts to provide a lot of value.
We can hop on over to the next slide and talk kind of about the key takeaways. We'll start wrapping up. Please feel free. Before we go through the key takeaways, I apologize. We do have another question from that last slide around, I don't know if it's specifically around Greenshades or certified payroll reporting or potentially both, but does this pull directly from a business's ERP like CMIC? So maybe we could answer both. I'm assuming it's certified payroll reporting. So Nick, could you answer that question?
Sure. Yeah, the answer for us would be absolutely, because a lot of times clients will have an ERP. There'll be things in there like project data or maybe additional elements of project data that are beyond what's in payroll. So definitely, yeah, our system can integrate and pull data from multiple solutions to get as much of it as possible. Sometimes clients just simply don't have a system like that. So what they have in payroll is all that there is to integrate, and then they just fill in some of the rest of the detail directly in our platform. But yeah, if that type of a system exists and that type of data is there, absolutely, we can get it.
Yeah, I mean, and for us, it's really the other way around. We would feed their ERP with the payroll. If they're doing it that way, we can feed Points North and their ERP with payroll data, and then it can go to the appropriate place. So.
Perfect. Okay, I wanted to make sure, since that had to do with technology specifically, that we asked that before we kind of talk through the key takeaways. So on the right-hand side, obviously, you'll see a lot of really helpful resources. Our website, pointsnorth.com, Greenshades website. A really good place to go is the U.S. Department of Labor Hour and Wage Division, which that obviously will be clickable in the slides that go out to everybody that's attending. And a big focus on, if you're taking on state prevailing wage work, make sure that you check to see what your state labor department's requirements are, because many states, like Nick and Scott have mentioned, there are different requirements state by state for specific information. On the left-hand side, you'll see kind of our big key takeaways. Nothing shocking. We know now that public works projects obviously can encourage financial stability and increase your competitive advantage in the market, and that manual work for payroll and prevailing wage can be risky and error prone, which Scott and Nick both mentioned. But fear not, there are ways to leverage both the knowledge specifically around prevailing wage and the technology to take on the certified payroll work, the government projects, with more confidence. And obviously, like we just mentioned, leveraging payroll solutions like Greenshades in partnership with Points North, certified payroll, you can take on this work and feel good about it and feel enabled to be able to go out and bid for those jobs. Are there any other key takeaways, Nick or Scott, that you kind of want to mention?
I think you did a great job summating it, Elise. Really, to me, if you take anything from this time, it's that prevailing wage work and government-funded work is not something that should be scary. It's not something that should be shied away from. There's more opportunity for it now than I've ever seen in my 12 plus years doing this, and our company being around now about 30 years. There's just so much of this work out there that if you take a little time to understand the requirements, put systems in place, can be very lucrative, very, very beneficial, and really benefit your employees. So don't shy away from it. Just do a little research and go to the experts to help.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If you put a solution, like Greenshades in place with Points North, it doesn't have to be scary. We know what we're doing on the payroll. They know what they're doing on the certified payroll side of things. So the reporting is there, and then we can track what you need to track, and it doesn't have to be scary. It can be, again, I don't like to simplify things, but relatively easy if you allow the systems to work for you.
Absolutely. And I think, so one other question that we received is, what are some key free resources to assist in getting certified and keeping up with the changing payroll landscape? So I breezed right past it, but we do, if you look in the handout section on your screen, there are 3 free handouts. Those will also be available after the session as well, specifically around how to get government contracts, how to fill out a certified payroll form, how to submit a certified payroll form, ways that you can, some just free resources that you can leverage to get a better understanding of what all takes place, even if you are filling those out manually. The how to fill out a certified payroll form will kind of walk you through those steps. And in terms of keeping up with the changing landscape, both from a payroll perspective and a prevailing wage perspective, of course, you know, you can follow Greenshades and Points North on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or now X, any of those. But also, you know, signing up, there are a lot of free resources with the Department of Labor, specifically around Q&A sessions about prevailing wage work or the Davis-Bacon Act. So doing a quick Google search on free webinars or Q&A sessions or seminars specifically hosted by the governments, like the Department of Labor or sam.gov, those are really good free resources to get a better understanding of what is required and some of the intricacies. But what I always say is, if you have a question about prevailing wage, call Nick. Nobody knows more about this space, the certified payroll side, than Nick Foucault. And those are a couple free resources. If the person that asked the question needs any more, I mean, you know, I'm sure that we could provide dozens, but I think that those are some really good ones to get you started. Well, thank you all so much for attending. We really appreciate the time you all took out of your days today. Appreciate all the questions, and big thank you to Scott and to Nick for all of the insights and all of the information they were able to provide. If you all have follow-up questions, obviously below you can see you can reach out to Greenshades or Points North. So with that, we'll say thank you so much and have a great day.